Hello, everybody. In this presentation, we are going to examine the features of academic language. And this is what the overview of this presentation looks like. We will start by defining academic language. We are going to provide examples of academic language in math, examples of academic language in science, and we're going to give sample activities focusing on language and content. But what is academic language? By academic language, we refer to the oral, written, auditory, and visual language proficiency required to learn effectively in any educational setting and academic program. So this is the language that we usually encounter in school settings, classroom lessons, textbooks, course books, tests, assignments. So this is the language that students in any educational setting are expected to understand, learn, and achieve fluency in. What does it include? It includes various components, so vocabulary, grammar, punctuation, syntax, discipline-specific terminology, or rhetorical conventions are part of the academic language. These are expected to allow students knowledge of those components, allow students to acquire knowledge and academic skills, and at the same time, this will allow them to navigate successfully school policies, assignments, expectations, and cultural norms usually found in educational settings. So let us have a look at some examples of academic language in math. And then we're going to proceed with the academic language in science and their demands for students. It's quite easy to identify the language in math. It is very math-specific language. On the one hand, we have prepositions that are usually found in chunks, in lexical chunks, such as add to, subtract from, multiply by, divide by, and so on. But also formulas and equation language, the value of A equals that. Steps of a process, which is a bit more demanding because they actually describe the process that students need to follow in order, for example, to solve a problem. When solving a word problem, first identify all the important information. Some more examples of math language include signal words, that is, words that are, although they are not specific only to math, they can actually help students, their knowledge can help students to understand what kind of mathematical operation they are required to perform in various problems. So when they find words like altogether, combined, in excess, sum, greater, in all, both, total, and so on and so forth, these words signal addition. They actually tell students that here you have to perform addition. And the same goes for multiplication. When they find the word times, multiply by, multiplicand, and multiplier, percent of, interest on, these are words that signal multiplication. Students need to understand that. And something similar goes for division. So signal words that signal division are words like divide, ratio, fraction, quotient, average, equal pieces, and so on, equal pieces per group, and so on and so forth. So we always bear in mind and remind ourselves that when teachers teach math or science or anything else, they are actually teaching math and language in combination. So how can they achieve that? How can they do that successfully so that students learn the mathematical or science concepts and at the same time improve their language skills? How can the teachers help students realize that, look, by doing that, by learning this mathematical concept, at the same time, you're actually developing your language proficiency? So the following strategies, techniques, activities, as you may want to call them, are just samples. And these are strategies that teachers are encouraged to use in their classrooms systematically in order to combine successfully the instruction of math or science with language. So in this particular case, we are looking at the practice of math and language in combination. And the strategies that we are going to have a look at is the creation of sentence frames and sentence stems, word banks, the use of stories and songs, rhymes, game-like activities, asking students to explain what it is they are doing as they solve math problems, and cooperative learning, which is an environment that encourages students to collaborate between them as they are trying to solve problems and communicate mathematical ideas, because this exchange of information not only helps them develop their mathematical knowledge, but at the same time, it helps them develop their language. So these are examples of sentence frames and sentence stems. A bear is bigger than a mouse. A quarter is smaller than 2 quarters, because this is a rectangular because it has and this is a triangle because it has etc. So what is that we require students to do in this particular case? In this particular case, we give them the sentences with a gap. So this gap actually requires to be filled in by the student, but this gap is very specific. It includes a specific language item, a lexical unit, a lexical chunk, and this facilitates students to emphasize on the particular lexical chunk, which is actually the core of the mathematical idea, the mathematical concept that they are learning at this point. So, for example, if we suppose that they are learning how to carry out comparisons and use bigger than, larger than, smaller than, and so on and so forth, this particular lexical item is what is required of students to produce. By giving them the rest of the sentence, and this is why we call it sentence frame, we give them the sentence ready-made, and we facilitate the processing of the information, because the students are required to fill in just one word in the correct form and the correct lexical unit. So sentence frames actually aim to give half of the answer, like if I can say that language-wise, and excluding the mathematical, the unit that is related to the new mathematical concept that they are learning. But at the same time, this allows them to develop fluency and use the language without hesitation as they are trying to express their ideas, their answers, and give the response to the particular mathematical problem. Sentence frames are usually found on the wall, so teachers are highly encouraged to have sentence frames ready-made on the wall and leave them there for as long as they are needed, because they allow students to use them and remember them, so they can develop their fluency and accuracy in expressing themselves by using the language. This is an example, another strategy, the creation of word banks. Word banks can include mathematical words, as the case here, but they can include any kind of vocabulary that we would like our students to learn, remember, and recall systematically and frequently. Word banks are found again on walls, okay? So they are teachers are encouraged to have them there and enrich them, expand them with new words, depending on the syllabus, depending on the vocabulary and the academic vocabulary that students need to learn, to remember, and use in order to develop their mathematical knowledge. The use of stories and songs is another very popular strategy in math classes. So they are not appropriate just for younger learners. They are appropriate for everybody, depending, of course, on the songs and depending on the stories. Songs and rhymes are appropriate because they have rhyme, melody, music, so they allow, they facilitate memorization and easy and fast retrieval. Stories, on the other hand, are very much appropriate for math classes, and these are examples of stories that you can find on the internet. And of course, this can be translated and adapted to any other language, depending on what language you're teaching and you're interested to teach. And they are very much appropriate because they enable students to understand how what they are learning in math is actually part of their everyday life. And in this way, they can understand much better the application of math knowledge in real life. This is an example of a game-like activity. This is actually a graph, which students are taught how to read in kindergarten, KN, first and second grade, usually, but even in higher grades, of course. However, this particular game-like activity has been adapted to suit the particular age, 5 to 7 years old. So every day, the teacher can do the same activity because every day, because of the absences, the number of students, of boys and girls in every class varies. So how many boys are there today present in our class and how many girls are there today present in our class is a very easy common question that teachers can ask students every day in order to create a graph. So when the graph is created, depending on the numbers of students present in class, the teacher can teach students how to read it. So today there are 9 boys and 13 girls in our class. Altogether, today there are 20 students in our class. So graphs can be used based on game-like activities like the one here, but they can also be used to practice addition, okay, or subtraction, depending on how you read the math problem to the students. Let us have a look at examples of academic language in science. Let us see how this can be taught, the academic language, how it can be promoted in science classes. So very often in scientific texts, we find that passive voice is used, models, embedded clauses, and nominalization, rotation, erosion, temperature, increase in temperature, decrease in temperature, and so on and so forth. So the language here is a bit more complex because of the particular structures and therefore more demanding. So especially embedded clauses like the latest research, comma, developed from laboratories on 3 continents, comma, indicate that, and so on and so forth, this kind of embedded clauses is highly challenging, demanding for students, even if they are in high school. And therefore, we need to support student understanding and even more student use, because this is even more difficult. The same, of course, goes for the use of modal verbs, passive voice, and nominalization. What about the kind of grammar that is used in science classes? This usually includes complex sentences like a growing number of research studies suggest, however, that such an increase in temperature could have a large impact on life, comma, especially in coastal regions of North America and sub-Saharan Africa. So you understand that such sentences are quite long, complex, and therefore they sometimes they impede understanding because of the linguistic difficulty. The understanding of the content becomes more challenging. Describing steps of a process is also quite demanding. Following evaporation, water vapor cools and falls to the earth as rain or snow. So although this is a description of a process and a description of the steps in a process, can be quite hard, and it needs practice and further support by the teacher. Cause and effect is a very common phenomenon that needs to be described in science classes as a result of auto emissions, nitric oxide and sulfur dioxide combined with water in the air. Main idea and details, identifying the main idea and details is also a common process that is required of students in science classes. The biomes in this area consist of grasslands, scrublands, deserts, and deciduous forests. So we understand here that science language is richer. So students find it probably more demanding, more challenging, and more practice and focus on language is required. So this is an activity, a strategy perhaps better, that teachers can use in order to support this science language, this science talk. Every circle here includes a sentence stem, the beginning of a sentence. These sentence stems can be generic in science talk, which means that they can be used in every science class, regardless of the topic. So the data show what caused this reaction. The solution for this problem is, let's do a survey to examine whether. An example of this is, this science talk can be used in every science class irrespective of the subject. However, we may have sentence stems that are more subject specific, theme specific. So changes in temperature indicate that. Let's check the density and mass of. So this includes more specific language, specific to the particular topic covered in the science class. So these web can include different languages every time. So students can vary the content of each sentence stem in each circle. And finally, these are sample activities of tasks that help students focus on both science and language. The first one, the weather report, is the simplest one, which of course can be graded. It can include language of different levels of language proficiency. This is a report of the weather every day. So students are required to select the particular figure, the particular drawing, either of snow, of rain, of clouds, of sun, depending on the weather of the day, and then use from the word bank that you can see at the bottom of the page, the words that actually will help them describe, make the weather report. So it is a science task, which is, however, supported, okay, with language from the word bank here. The next task is a descriptive task. So students here are required to describe a nucleus, a root, which are scientific concepts that probably have been taught in science classes, but they have to use very specific language in order to describe them. So this language can be supported with sentence frames or sentence stems or word bank. And it is a very short description, as you can see here, which, however, has to be based on specific and accurate use of language, science language. And therefore, students have to be very accurate in the use of the particular language for the description. And finally, a more demanding, challenging task for students in science classes is this reflection journal. So what students are required to do here is to take information from a scientific text, but after that, they have to express their own thoughts. So this is a reflection journal. Actually, you can see here it's a blank piece of paper, and therefore students have to provide more expensive language output. And that's why it can be more challenging, more demanding. always word banks and sentence frames and sentence stems can support this language production, so that students can become more accurate and fluent in their language output. Thank you very much for watching. And if you need more information, you can always visit our website. Thank you.